Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mad Science Lab podcast, brought to you by the combination of the Fantasy Football Universe and the Fantasy Football Advice Network. We are back today for another edition of 2024 Dynasty Risers and Fallers. I am your host, Aaron St. Dennis. Find me on Twitter at FFMadScientist. Joined today by Matt Mormann, who doesn't have his Twitter handle on screen. Where can we find you and your work?
It's at Real Matt Mormann on Twitter, over on YouTube and podcasts at the ADP Average Dudes podcast. So pretty simple stuff there, really. Yeah, I didn't put that on screen though. That's on me.
That's what it was. Okay, I had to add the real Matt Mormann behind it because I tried to send you the show link earlier on Twitter, but you didn't come up when I typed your name. So I sent it on Sleeper where we were messaging from in a league, but
yeah,
gotcha. Yeah, I didn't add the word "the real" before it, so that's why I couldn't find you. All right, well, let's get right into it, I suppose. We will start with your riser. That would be San Francisco wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk. He is heading into his fifth season. He's finished as wide receiver 35, 35, 15, and 14. Last year, 75 catches on 105 targets, 1,342 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. Keep Trade Cut has him wide receiver 13. So does Fantasy Pros. They have him, Fantasy Pros 22nd overall in one quarterback drafts, KTC 23rd overall. So he's basically being valued as a high-end wide receiver 2 and back of the second round in one QB drafts. Where do you have Aiyuk and how high do you think he can rise?
So, yeah, I was looking at the Fantasy Pros rankings for it. And, he's right behind guys like Garrett Wilson, Puka, Olave, and Waddle. And those are all 4 names that are right there in that same kind of low-end 1, high-end 2 kind of range. And I prefer Aiyuk over all those guys. I think he's got the fewest future quarterback questions among that group. Even if he were to be traded, I feel like he'd be going into a pretty good situation, right?
Who saw that coming? Because that's how it always works out when you draft Mr. Irrelevant. You get long-term quarterback stability. That's how we
exactly.
For all the analysis and all the data we compile and we say, playing the odds, yeah, it's a fucking guessing game at the end of the day. So don't let anyone tell you fantasy football isn't a guessing game most of the time.
You know what? In my little brain, I've basically just chosen that Brock Purdy went 3rd overall instead of Trey Lance, right? Like, I'm just basically assigning him that capital now and putting him in that spot for me mentally. That's my own headcanon for it.
Yeah.
But no, like, even if he does stay in San Fran, right? Yeah, you've got Purdy who's going to get locked up here real soon. And then the thing that really appeals to me the most about Aiyuk is all those other veteran weapons around him, right? Like, currently, it's a bit of a, pie that's getting chopped up 4 ways. And he's still got 1,300 yards in that pie. But, McCaffrey's up there running back. He just had massive touches 2 years in a row. I'm going to take him 1st overall in August. But, we know how this goes with these running backs at that age, right? Kittle's always had his injury questions. Also, he's kind of a cap casualty next offseason. Same thing with Debo, right? He's basically the same story as Kittle. And so I just look at Aiyuk and I see maybe not necessarily 2024 if he stays in San Fran. It may be exactly what it was last year, in which case, hey, you're getting a wide receiver 14 overall. But I'm looking at the opportunity of 2025 and further in Dynasty, and I'm just seeing, not all those are going to happen, right? Not McCaffrey's not going to get hurt, and Debo's going to get hurt, and Kill's going to get hurt or cut. But if just one of those things happens, it becomes a lot more of a pie for a guy who just had 1,300 yards.
Yeah, it's funny. I was just looking into some of the contracts, and he's on the last year of his deal. Yeah. I wasn't sure. I thought he was a free agent this year, but he is not.
No, he's got 1 year left, which we see a lot of times that's where guys either get extended or traded, right? And so if he gets traded, then hopefully it's a DJ Moore, this year Stephon Diggs, right?
I can't see him getting traded. They're a contender. He's on a relatively inexpensive deal.
But it's only 1 year left on that deal, though.
Yeah, I can't see why they would trade him, though. Like, I get it if they're a rebuilding team and they're not a contender and they want to trade him to get something, but he's a vital piece to their team. I think he's got more value on a playoff run than he has to trade him for a draft pick. So
I do agree with that. And that's why I prefer him stay there and those veteran pieces fall off the roster in a year or two from now.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I was high on him last year, too. It was one of those situations where Debo was going as wide receiver 15. He was going as wide receiver 35, despite the fact that he had outproduced Debo the year before. So I've always just been in on Aiyuk because he came with similar or slightly better production than Debo at a third of the cost. I mean, he's a little more expensive this year. Well, considerably more. He's up where Debo was. I'm going to look quickly. Where's Debo in the rankings? So Aiyuk is up to 13 and Debo's down to 28. So they basically flip-flopped. Did Debo outproduce him last year? I'm doing this on the fly here. Debo was wide receiver 15. Aiyuk was 14, so they were back-to-back. So I do like Aiyuk better long-term for Dynasty. I may have more shares of Debo this year because Debo's coming at 20 picks later, but essentially the same production. So that's a tough one for me. But like I said, Aiyuk, this is Dynasty, so long-term, I think I'd much rather have Aiyuk. Let's look at the group he's in here. He is, where the hell was he? I just seen him. Oh, okay. He's in the middle of tier 3 of wide receivers on Fantasy Pros. It's got 5 guys from 11 to 15. You tell me where you think he ranks. I guess you want to rank these 5 then.
Yep.
All right.
So that grouping being Waddle, they got league neighbors in there right now is already without landing.
You're on your screen. Right? I was going to name it off. You're on top of it.
Oh yeah, I got you, man. I'm right here.
Yeah, go for it.
It's Waddle, Neighbors, Aiyuk, Devonta Smith, and Michael Pittman. For sure, for me, Aiyuk is over all those guys. I would actually extend that tier up a couple spots here. They have Puka, Tyreek, and Olave above that tier. And I would put Aiyuk above all those guys. Now, if you are a true just win now team, Tyreek Hill, right? Of course.
Yeah.
But if you are looking at 2025 in any regard at all, to me, that's an easy Aiyuk in that case. So that's where I put that line. I think him and Garrett Wilson is incredibly close, which is ironic because we'll get to that in just a second. Yeah. But I think I do actually prefer Aiyuk even over Garrett Wilson. So does that mean if I'm going to start this summer, am I taking Brandon Aiyuk in round 1? I don't know. I might be. I mean, if it's super flex, I'm probably just going quarterback in that first round, no matter what. But, there's scenarios, though, where I see myself being pretty darn high on Brandon Aiyuk for that.
I don't know. It's tough for me. I look at the range. I'm not taking him over anyone. Tyreek Hill, is like you said, it's team dependent. It's like build dependent where you're at. If I'm on a rebuilding team, I'm obviously taking Aiyuk. Contender, I'm taking Hill all day. I'm pretty high on Olave. I think he's appropriately priced. That range, Waddle, Neighbors, him, Smith, Pittman. I feel like I'd take him. I don't know. That's tight. But literally, I think I'd take him easily over Neighbors. I always like the bird in the hand over the 1 and 2 in the bush or whatever. So give me Aiyuk there. But Waddle, Smith, Pittman, I think they're all literally. It's a case where I'm not targeting any of the 4 first. I'm taking whoever's the last one left in that tier. Sure. So I don't think I have a preference, as much of a cop-out as that is. I guess if I was forced to rank it, I would go, oh, that's gross. I don't even know how to rank that. I think I go Waddle, Aiyuk, Pittman, Smith, Waddle, Pittman, Aiyuk, Smith. So I probably have him as the second or third, the middle one. I think I'm lowest on Devonta Smith. I'm highest on Jalen Waddle, and I see him and Pittman similarly. Although I don't really know what the Anthony Richardson situation is going to be like. Is he going to be that kind of passer? So that's a really tough range. I think Fantasy Pros has him pretty accurately valued. What do you think?
Yeah, I do. I like I said, I have them a little bit higher than that, but I do totally understand the perception and the overall consensus being in that range. I just think for me personally, I prefer him a little bit over those guys.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, the only one I think I'd take considerably. I've always been high on Waddle. I know he's underperformed at times, but I'm a Waddle guy.
I do too, and he's kind of almost just a quick bonus riser. Like he's a guy who's also kind of got that situation coming forth, right, where Tyreek might fall off that roster before long, and so then Waddle could potentially be the number 1 target again. And we've seen him produce in that role before. I was so encouraged with Waddle his first year being able to do those short things because I knew from college he can do the deep stuff, right? So I feel like Waddle's kind of a sleeping giant too.
All right, let's move on to your faller. That is New York Jets wide receiver Garrett Wilson, who we previously mentioned. Going into his 3rd year, he's been wide receiver 21, right? Wide receiver 26. Obviously, quarterback has been an issue. I'm thinking it might still be an issue because I'm not convinced Aaron Rodgers is anything anymore. Last year, 95 catches, 168 targets, 1,042 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. So his lack of elite production was not a lack of targets because, man, did he get fed targets. He is wide receiver 7 on both Keep Trade Cut and Fantasy Pros. Fantasy Pros has an 11th overall, Keep Trade Cut 13, which has been updated more recently. When I did this, let me look. What did I see? I have him as 11th overall. Oh, okay, 11th overall, not wide receiver. I'm reading it wrong. He is wide receiver 7 is what he is, 11th overall. Okay. So for me, he's in the tier 2 of receivers, which they exclude the top 3, obviously, and then it goes from St. Brown all the way down to Olave. And I think, honestly, like, I might be lower on Marvin Harrison in this group because I'm never let's just blindly buy into the rookie, especially when we don't have a landing spot. But if I look at this group of St. Brown, AJ Brown, Harrison, Wilson, Puka, Tyreek, and Olave, with the exception of Tyreek, if I'm on a rebuilding team, I think Wilson's last for me in this group. Where do you have him in this group that goes from 4 to 10?
I agree. I'm right there with you, right? If I'm in a contending window, then it is Tyreek. But if I'm in a rebuilding, then it's not. Because especially if I'm in a rebuilding, that means by the time I'm ready to compete, Aaron Rodgers is no longer my quarterback either, right? So then we have those questions arising once again then from Garrett Wilson. And I don't know. He's just he to me, that tier should be split in half too, by the way. Like, to me, it's Amon-Ra, AJ Brown, and then likely Marvin Harrison. I'm kind of with you. Let's see where the landing spot's at. But like, to me, that tier needs to be split in half. Those 3 guys are tier 2. The rest of those guys are tier 3, and I'm bumping Aiyuk into that tier then, right?
See, for me, it's I don't have my tiers this way. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown bumped up into the first tier.
Okay.
AJ Brown as the last guy in the first tier, and then my tier 2 consists of Harrison, Wilson, Puka, Hill, and Olave.
That's fair.
That's how I do it. But I'm much higher on St. Brown. I'm not high on AJ Brown, but I still think he belongs in the top 5 there.
Yeah, I actually considered putting him into my fallers in place of Garrett Wilson here because I agree. Things just kind of felt a little icky there in that second half, and with his, not age, but, he's getting to that point where it started to be a question. But on Garrett Wilson, though, you mentioned the targets were outstanding, right? It was, 160 plus, right? And
168.
168, yeah. Oh my gosh, right? And so, like, that's not much of a concern. However, I do think that, with the kind of final push of Aaron Rodgers with the Jets, we saw his wish list last summer. I would only imagine there's going to be another wish list again this spring, right? Of go get me all these guys, right? And last year it was like Allen Lazard and Randall Cobb. I have to imagine they're going to upgrade that other spot opposite him in some way. I don't think it's going to be a huge, he's not going to plummet down to a 110 target, but does it get him from the extreme of 160 down to that 140 range, right? And so that's one thing. The other thing I want to mention here, because this is maybe the most shocking stat I've ever heard in my life. Zach Wilson was actually 11th best in off-target percentage last year. That boggled my mind because I think of Zach Wilson as just like throwing it in the ground all the time. And admittedly, I could not find the Garrett Wilson catchable ball rate. But that tells me, though, that he got 160 targets, and it wasn't as bad as QB play is in New York. It was not – I mean, it was a train wreck, but, it wasn't 32nd like I maybe would have thought it would have been with Zach Wilson, And so even with all those targets, that production just wasn't quite there for him. He ended up being right there in points per game with Deontay Johnson. He was behind Cortland Sutton, Adam Thielen, and Jacoby Myers. Tell me more about their QB play, right? So, like, the fact that he's behind those guys has me concerned. I would have, even a bad QB, I would have liked him to be at the top of those guys. And he's going as, like you said, wide receiver 7. He's going right there at the tippity top of things. For me, it's less of a, like, startup draft situation. It's more of a trade situation. I'm not currently in startup mode at the moment. I don't have any startups upcoming.
Me neither.
So I am just thinking about the teams where I have Garrett Wilson and kind of what is my game plan going forward. And yeah, if I can capitalize and trade him for, the boat that we had available last offseason, then I would happily do that. Because a year ago when Aaron Rodgers got dropped on this roster, I think myself and a lot of people were like, oh, well, that means he gets 2 years of really great quarterback play. Well, one of those years is now in the past, and I don't necessarily think we should count on that second year even happening at this point.
Yeah, I agree. That's the reason I have him and Olave at the bottom of this tier. I don't have any faith in either quarterback situation. I don't think Rodgers is going to be the savior they expect him to be. So that's why I am lower on Wilson than most. Alrighty.
I think it's fair to believe that he could have been that this past year, right? But then, a 40-year-old coming off a torn Achilles, like at this point, it's such a long shot,
I wasn't really in on him to begin with last year. I think he was showing signs of fading to begin with, so
yeah.
I don't like him now. Before we get out of here, you want to take one chance to tell everyone where they can find you?
Yeah, so it's the ADP Average Dudes podcast. You can find it on, Spotify, Apple, and of course on YouTube as well. That's actually where I've kind of becoming even more and more active is YouTube. I try to kind of keep short-term videos, things usually anywhere from like 10 to 12 minutes is usually kind of the range I aim for on things. Kind of get you the quick, snippy versions of things. Try to go deep, but not not prolong it too much.
Because nobody has an attention span anymore. That's how you have to do
it. I don't either, so it's fair.
Gotcha. Me too. It's like creating content for my kid who I can hear in the other room yelling and screaming. So, all right. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into the Mad Science Lab podcast on the Fantasy Football Universe and Fantasy Football Advice Network. Check back tomorrow for another edition of Dynasty Risers and Fallers. For Aaron and Matt, thank you all for tuning in. Take care. Have a great night.